Welcome to This Week in Black Media for May 8th, 2019. Our first video featured this week from Black Media comes from the Advise So channel, and it shows how Meghan McCain and Ted Cruz attempt to scapegoat Ilhan Omar for the recent synagogue shooting. And we see this as a trend that happens often. There's also a video from Professor Black Truth that makes reference to this that we'll see as we scroll down. I'd like to start with addressing that Ted Cruz, I don't consider him Caucasian because of his supposed Spanish heritage, which would entail black genetic markers, would entail African genetic markers. Too often we see that Spanish people are taking the designation of whiteness, which the only distinction against whiteness is blackness. You see, so what they're doing is they're trying to appropriate to themselves the myth of whiteness to maintain the social caste system that has been put in place by white supremacy ideology to their own benefit. Fortunately, not all of them are like that. There's enough Mexican and Latin, Latino people, Iberian people, so to speak, from a broad spectrum that reject the idea of being designated white, that are proud of their culture and make a distinct, draw a distinct line that they are not white, which is a good thing. See, because what you see is the Europeans desperate to up their numbers, and in so doing, they're willing to designate anyone white, and we've seen this has happened for a long time with the U.S. Census. You see, this is not a new phenomenon. For those of you that don't know, people come here from Eastern Africa, Ethiopians, etc. They are required to call themselves white under the census, and there's even been people that have fought against it. So the United States wants to maintain that myth. But this is just a larger trend of white people and their want to be counterparts, attacking black people for what boils down to psychotic European genocidal behavior that is a marker of their behavioral patterns all throughout history. And I'm not talking about those peaceful groups of Europeans, which we know existed, but they lost, as I've said before, so we have to look at who won. And this has been the dominant trend, and it will be their downfall. As we see them, the European is not trusted nor liked globally. You see, so when you look at the United Nations table, we have to be honest. They're not trusted. They have no allies, and they should not. You see, so but this goes. Here's the video from Professor Black Truth. Everyone wants to blame people of color, and you see that. And then we see, related to that, Facebook's recent banning of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, which we have two videos there. Vicky Dillard was the first one I saw post on that. So what you have, what I want to go in is on the Europeans that are sticking up for Zionism, that are adamant about quote-unquote anti-Semitism, because it shows a gross ignorance on their part, because they don't realize how the powers that be of Israel despise them. You see, and that is no secret, that they're considered goys, and just marrying into them isn't going to make a difference, not if they come to world domination, which there's not enough of them to do that. But they're hated. Intelligent European people know this. You see, we even had one of our presidents write a book about that, about the threat that they were. And it's not anti-Semitism, so that's another thing we're going to go into here today. We're going to go through something that is going to recycle. I believe that all our children should know it. I believe European people and African people should know the narcissism that's involved in this concept of anti-Semitism, because it shows an arrogance on the part of a small group of Semitic speakers, a minority of Semitic speakers appropriating to themselves the title Semite, as in exclusively. We see that as no difference in their demands for a separate designation for anti-Semitism when it comes to racism. It's because they think they're better than everyone else. What other group has ever said, hey, we need a special designation of racism for us exclusively? It shows. It shows in what they do. It shows in their language. It shows in their interpretation of the scriptures. You see, Israel is a racist state, and all we have to do is look at the citations from Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a racist, a genocidal racist. I challenge, and all we have to do is look at that Israel voted him in, knowing this, knowing what he does to the Palestinian people. It's no different than the United States of America is a racist nation. Now we know this because they voted Donald Trump into office. You see, there's no secrets there. You see, but what is disturbing is you have so many people of European background that are pro-Zionist and don't realize that they're hated. It shows how ignorant they are. And if they think they're ever going to have a seat at the table with these people who have convinced themselves through years of conditioning to think that they are the chosen people above all others, they're sadly mistaken. And I make the argument that if they are the chosen people, then that necessarily includes us Africans. You see, because it is our blood that runs through their veins at the deepest levels. So that's going to bring us to go and take a look at the narcissism here, and we're going to do that right now. We're going to do a review of a video, and this is something that I'm going to go through over and over again for those of you that are watching here, and then you'll be able to memorize it. So don't get tired of it when you see the information repeat. If it repeats, it's important, and if you notice it, as I've said before, it means you're learning it. And if you already have it memorized, well, try to memorize it more deeply. So here we go. Let's take a look at this. Just a review, something that we'll recycle over and over and over again. So here we have it, and you can see here, this just goes to what I believe that the Europeans should know, or that too many Europeans are not aware of this. Once they find out, and I think that statistically speaking, it's inevitable, they're going to be pissed off. So this is a famous quote from those that are in the know, from a Sephardic rabbi of Israel, a person that would be designated Semitic. And he says that Gentiles exist only to serve Jews. Well, newsflash to our European brothers and sisters, they're talking about you. It goes without saying that they hate Africans. Well, we know this, but by Gentiles they mean you, and you know that from your own Christian scriptures. That's why I find it ruefully comical when we see Christian pastors supporting Zionism and eager for the return of this Israel as according to the Bible, where they could sit and be servants to their quote-unquote Jewish masters. It's disturbing, and hopefully more eyes are opened. So when we see Meghan McCain and Donald Trump, even though his daughter is married in to that group, they're always going to be considered outsiders. And all you have to do is look at the way that they've moved socially throughout history. They have their own communities, and it's very exclusionary. And in many regards racist. And of course, I'm not talking about all Jews. I always have to be very clear about that, because you have many, many Jewish people that are anti-Zionists. You have to remember that. You have to remember that. Many of them. It's not the majority. The media makes it look like it's the majority. So we have to remember that also. I'm talking about an exclusive group of racists here, just as it is when I talk about Europeans. I'm talking about racists. Hateful racists. Not all. So this brings us to the subject. What is a Semite? Because they claim to be Semitic, and they are not the only ones. They are a small proportion of the speakers of the globe that are Semites. So the very accusation of anti-Semitism towards someone like Ilhan Omar, or an African like myself, is ridiculous. As a matter of fact, anyone has the right to claim that, and I'm going to show that right now. So my question to them, anytime they make such an accusation, especially people like Meghan McCain, she's there she has her seat for reasons of political nepotism, just like Chelsea Clinton. She's there because her parents were somebody. And see, not because she earned it, not because they're experts in any kind of field. They're there by privilege. That's why we should shun them. I made a video about that, and YouTube censored it, banned it. So first define a Semitic. We've been through this, right? We have to know what a Semite is before we can define what an anti-Semitic is. And here's what I want to point out. Semites, like the racist rabbi above, the Sephardic Jew. Let's take a look at him. Let's look at his gene pool. See, we have significant sub-Saharan African genetic markers across a broad spectrum of Jewish populations. Let's do the common sense mathematics there. Why is that broad spectrum there? Because that was the pre-existing genetic marker that was there to begin with. Newsflash, from this perspective, that means that us Africans of the diaspora are the real Jews. You get that? We are the core group. Not saying that other groups don't have claims, but we certainly do, according to this. And all we have to do is look at their genes to see that. It speaks for itself. We add to this the linguistics data, and the cultural data, and the symbolic data, and the mathematical data, and the evidence is so overwhelming it goes without saying. So they can't talk to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan about anti-Semitism when he has the deepest root African genetic signature to begin with. See, then we have to get biblical, because they're using all of this argument based on biblical statements. You see, about the origins of Shem, and that the Israelite bloodline is the royal bloodline. You see, but what is that royal bloodline? There's nobody from Moses or Abraham. What we have is what science offers us, and what science shows us is that the people of Israel are Africans, just as much as any European is. And we know that because our blood's in them. Not all of us can say that the quote-unquote Ashkenazi markers are in us. You see, it's not even a chicken-egg argument, really. The evidence shows that it's African to begin with, and when we look at the cultural patterns, it speaks for itself. These two books right in the back here, we're going to go into those in August, and you'll be able to see it for yourself. I'm not fishing for anything. As a matter of fact, my research brought me to these conclusions because I didn't have any other conclusion to come to. It wasn't what I was looking for. Certainly, I was looking for the Egyptian, ancient Kemetic root of African populations, and then beneath that, the African traditional religions that birthed all of those, which are fractal. That's a different tangent, but we have to take a look at the significance here. So we have a small group of people claiming to be the only Semites, that actually, the only thing that shows that they're actual Semites with other Jewish populations, when we look at it historically, is the African signature. This brings us to the Arabic populations, that they often accuse being anti-Semitic. And when we look at the history of Arabic populations, what do we find? We find that they too have significant proportions of sub-Saharan African genetic markers, and even more so than the so-called Jews. Interesting. And these people they practice the religion, etc. You see what I mean? So we're all connected. As a matter of fact, we are all bloodline genetic connected to everyone, with the exception of the people that are designated European. Look at the irony in that. So we asked the question up at the top, did we not? First divine Semitic. Well, here we've gone through it genetically. This means I'm not saying Ashkenazis aren't Semitic. They're Semitic, but so are our Arab brothers and sisters. You see? So we've done it genetically. We've done it symbolically and culturally in the text that you've seen behind these other two pictures. Let's go into it linguistically. And we see, you can read that for yourself. Semitic is a language group. It's not an individual group of people that the quote-unquote Ashkenazi and other Jewish Zionists have claimed for themselves. It's not. They're a small group. And they derived it from the biblical name Shem. You see, what is consistent about Shem, about the quote-unquote Shemite descendant populations throughout the Bible? We know it's the sub-Saharan African genetic markers. For us majority black viewers here at this channel, they're talking about us. So what we see, and then I repeat, Semitic is part of the Afro-Asiatic language family. So let's go into the Afro-Asiatic languages, and let's look at some percentages there. And what we find is that the vast majority of Semitic speakers are black and brown-skinned people, not pale-skinned Ashkenazi, who are also black people when you dig deep enough. So here we see, look at all those populations, and then we're going to do the math, right? The vast majority of Semitic speakers are black and brown-skinned people. Now, let's do the math. 330 million brown people and black people, and 5 million Hebrews. You see, and we're giving that to them that have the more European-looking surface structure appearance, but we still know that the African lies beneath. All of these groups here have African genetics. All of them. Dr. Chikanta Job showed us that. His research was called Suspect, and now it's been confirmed by genetics. Here again, that reminds me of what a nincompoop Mary Lefkowitz is. Yes, I called Mary Lefkowitz a nincompoop. Moving along, let's take a look at the geographical area of these people here, this quote-unquote Arabic speakers, these Semites. You see, it's Africa, Saudi Arabia, you see what I mean? The Arabian Peninsula, etc. It's all black people. We look at it historically. We look at the transference of pottery markings from the work of Dr. Clyde Winters, the transference of the language and cultural patterns. We know it's African people. It came from Africa, and it moved over to the Arabian side, not the other way around. There was exchange in between, but it's the same people. Let's take a look at that. Ethiopia, East Africa, Horn of Africa, etc. Crossed all the way and populated all that. Let's see. So they're black people. Black people were the seed group. Moving along. Let's look at the biblical again. And what I want to point out is that the Arabic, Aramaic, Ethiopic, Hebrew, and the Canaanite Phoenician languages, all of those populations can be shown to be black African, sub-Saharan African. And particularly when we look at the Canaanite Phoenician languages, we're going to find the Niger-Congo root there, and we're going to find that that's Yoruba, that's Igbo, Hausa, Fulani, all that whole conglomeration of Africans that would be considered those groups. And we find that they made their way into the Iberian Peninsula, and that they populated all of that. It was all black people, like Dr. Job said. So let's take a look at it from a map perspective. Look, that's Arabic, all that, all throughout northern Africa, Semitic speakers. But they also have, as we've seen from what we looked at before, we have those East African markers. And then these East African markers even have the Sub-Saharan African markers beneath them. So you can't find, you look at Ethiopian genetics and you're going to find quote-unquote Sub-Saharan African genetic markers from Western Africa that are resonant among the Yoruba. And let's take a look at it from a map. Common sense says that Ethiopian Somali are quote-unquote Sub-Saharan African to begin with. What does this come to? A common root structure that I call the E1B1s, and I know they changed the names of the markers, but I'm saying there's a common root there for East Africans and West Africans, and I will show beyond any reasonable doubt that that common cultural signature is fractals with that. So what does this do? It brings us back to Dr. Job's observations, and that has been confirmed by modern day genetic evidence, and that the cultural patterns and the religions of what we find in the Bible originated in black Africa, and they're still carried by people that carry black African signatures, some of which are under the delusion that they have the right to call themselves the only Semites on the planet. It's laughable if you really look at the evidence. Not one of them can provide a legitimate argument against what's been stated here. It's self-evident. There is no argument. So here's the final statement on the matter. Sub-Saharan African genes constitute the dominant common root genetic signature of Semitic speakers, and this includes the Ashkenazi of Israel. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Now you see that our Arabic brothers and sisters, this is from another video, they recognize that the Africans of the diaspora are of those tribes. Now, what they say that the Hebrews, that the Ashkenazi have no genetic history there, and that's where it might make people mad or angry or whatnot, but that's where I say, no, genetics doesn't say that. It says they're still the Israels, or they're still the, you can't say that they're not. They have the genes, if we're looking at it genetically. The Ashkenazi have the Sub-Saharan African genetic markers that they have in common with their Arabic brothers and sisters. They're related. And there's evidence there showing that too, that they have common genetic backgrounds, and yet they have been convinced to hate each other. So let's look at it at the map again. That's the majority of Semitic speakers originally. from what the perspective we're looking at right now, but let's look at it from a skin color map. See, they're brown people and black people. So, and here's the evidence that shows that the Palestinian Jews that share genetic roots. You see, we're all related, actually. So let's do a rundown here quick. Number 1, Ashkenazi Jews compose a vast minority of Semitic peoples. Number 2, Arabic and Ethiopian speakers are Semitic speakers among many other black and brown groups. You see. Number 3, Palestinians are Semitic speakers too. This makes Zionist Jews the most violent anti-Semites of all. All you got to do is look at the record to know that. The crimes against humanity they commit on a regular basis that are supported by our government, and everyone looks the other way. The pro-Zionists, at least. And then number four, bottom line, the Ashkenazi are not the only Semites. See number 1. I repeat, the Ashkenazi are not the only Semites. We cannot forget that. You see, they want to convince us otherwise. And I would say to them, your entire history is suspect. They don't want to have a conversation about these 2 books. They don't. It's indefensible. They don't want to talk about it at all. It's really looks very bad for them, and it's all rooted in historical documents. This is no conjecture. This is no fake news. This is the news they don't want us to know about. Sooner or later, it's going to come out, though, because it's already happened here. It's already happening, and it's spreading. So, I rambled enough there, but all of that is pertinent. All of it's pertinent to the August 20th and 21st presentation I'll start doing when I open up a little bit about biblical history. The Zionists have lied about their identity. They have lied about their place within the biblical scriptures, and they have lied about their exclusivity as being chosen people. And these are verifiable documents of history. It's very interesting. The ancient Israelite and Jewish people were overwhelmingly people of color. And all we have to do is look at trace the history of the languages to know that. And look at the genetic signatures that are there. You see, they left their signatures there too. The African signatures are embedded in their own rituals. It's embedded in their language. It's embedded in their Kabbalah. You see, they were speaking in their African dialect without knowing it. I suspect the smart ones do know it. I suspect the smart ones knew that this was going to come out sooner or later anyway. I suspect the smart ones know that there's a presence there in Western Africa. Just as sure as I am is that the priests of Western Africa among the Ifa tradition know who they are also. It's probably not very healthy to discuss it publicly, though, given colonialization. Priests emerge everywhere, though. Our knowledge system can die as long as human beings exist. There are recyclings of awareness. And there are coherences of patterns that are inexplicable by conventional means. There is no crying wolf here. All you have to do is tune in August to find out. So on that note, as always, until next week, continue to watch and support Black media.